15 countries and counting Muslim nations, especially in the Gulf, continue to lash out at India in protest for the words on Prophet Muhammad by a BJP spokesperson since suspended. I'm Barkhadat, you're with the Mojo Story. Our big focus today continues to be on the aftermath and the consequences on the comments made about Prophet Muhammad by Nupur Sharma, a since suspended spokeswoman of the BJP, along with another party colleague, Naveen Jindal. 15 nations have now protested and demanded a public apology from India. While the government has distanced itself from these remarks, is that enough? The diplomatic crisis is showing absolutely no signs of abating. In the meantime, Ms. Sharma has been given security from the Delhi police and has been served summons from the Mumbai police. India is now, after being regretful, is being somewhat aggressive, at least in its response to the OIC and Pakistan's intervention, saying we do not need lectures from countries that do not have a sound record of pluralism on their own. But like I said, this is a controversy that is showing no signs of abating. And in fact, there now seems to be somewhat of an alternative narrative, at least in the online world, that is supporting Nupur Sharma, supporters of this government, some supporters angry with the government for having distanced itself from the party spokeswoman. Let's introduce our guest today. We are joined on the program today by Hardik Rajkor, a writer and an analyst. Welcome. It's your first time on the Mojo Story. We welcome you to the program. Suhasini Haidar, veteran journalist, strategic affairs editor at The Hindu, joins us as well. Welcome, Suhasini. Ambassador Navdeep Suri, who's a former diplomat, has served in the UAE, among other nations across the world, is with us. And of course, senior retired diplomat, Ambassador Vivek Karju, is with us as well. Zafar Sareshwala will be joining the program in moments from now. Let me start with you, Ambassador Karju. You know, you've seen many things as a diplomat. Have you ever seen a situation where India's diplomats need to go out and bat and manage a crisis that has erupted from what a party spokesperson has actually said? I mean, what do you think the IFS community, the diplomatic corps, is actually feeling at this growing crisis today?
Well, the IFS corps is a professional corps, and they would be approaching this issue in a very analytical manner and reporting faithfully to the government all that they've been told by their hosts, and in some cases giving suggestions of how to manage the current situation. Uh, I have been struck by the fact that there are many aspects to this, to what is happening. One, of course, is a diplomatic aspect, and there is then the domestic aspect. In the diplomatic aspect, I feel that there is need to distinguish between the political approach of the countries that are protesting and their approaches to theology. We all know that the Islamic world has many differences, inter se differences. But there is one point on which all Muslims come together, and that is reverence for the Prophet. So I don't think that this is an issue of the India's treatment of its minorities. That is in a political category. This particular matter is in a theological category. And it is because all Muslims have this deep, deep reverence for the Prophet that if they perceive that anything has been said about him, any statement or action which is disrespectful of the Prophet Muhammad, then they react and react with a certain vigor. That is what I see is happening. But you mentioned one particular point, and on that, I think we need some clarity because I personally It's a factual point which I don't know. Uh, as far as the Qataris are concerned, they of course came out with a statement in which they demanded an apology from the government. I'm not, at the same time, they appreciated
Yes.
the action taken by the party. Now, in most cases that I've seen, the government issuing a statement or making a démarche have have loaded the decision of the party. I'm not quite sure whether the Qatari demand that the government issues an apology, India issues an apology, has been reiterated or repeated by all countries who have made these demarches. So that's a factual point, and perhaps you can guide us whether that is an accurate situation. My
Uh,
last point, just give me one other half a minute more. It is this, that I have never known in my diplomatic experience, and Navdeep is here and he can correct me if I'm wrong, when the Vice President of India or a senior dignitary like the Vice President, the President or the Prime Minister, when they are on a visit, an official visit, I don't know what this visit became, but on an official visit, that the ambassador has been summoned and a démarche of this kind has been made. Therefore, I feel very strongly that the Minister of External Affairs, once this comment was made on Indian television, should have monitored this to to see how it was playing on the social media, and corrective action should have been taken. Also, a question should have arisen in everyone's mind whether the Vice President's visit should continue, so that
yeah.
this particular embarrassment was avoided. It has certainly been an embarrassment, and I think the Minister of External Affairs, who is a very, very accomplished diplomat himself, professional diplomat himself, needs to ponder over this question, because the statement was, these comments were made on May 26th, and the Vice President's speech for Qatar on June 4th. So a good 10 days had elapsed. This is what has troubled me very much.
Yeah. Let, let me just come in here on that factual point. I should correct myself. Qatar is the country that demanded Ambassador Karju the apology. I kind of clubbed all the nations together. Different countries have had different responses, but certainly 15 have now protested. So you're correct to point out that particular sort of casual turn of phrase that I deployed, and I correct myself on that. But to your larger point, I think that's the point that Suhasini has been making repeatedly, that the government and the party had every opportunity to actually contain this before it became a crisis, to actually look ahead at the vice president's visit, and to actually also respond just as a point of I would say inclusiveness, or convey a message of inclusive politics. You see this as a theological debate. I'm not sure everybody sees this, because it's not quite like we're discussing Taslima Nasreen or Salman Rushdie and freedom of speech, or we're discussing, the Danish cartoons. We're discussing actually just a banal tutu meme television debate where extremes are deliberately made to collide against the other. You don't agree, Ambassador Karji? Okay, hang on. Let me just get others, because I know everyone will have something to say to both what I and you have said. I'll get Suhasini before I come to Navdeep to make a brief point, because this is the point she's repeatedly been making. The government did not need to wait for 10 days and for this crisis and for us to debate why we should be lectured on rights by countries that don't have a great record of their own. So Suhasini, go ahead.
I would absolutely say that the principle of freedom of speech and all of that comes with certain restrictions. That restriction is hate speech. Now we have a situation where this comment has been made. People across the country had asked the government to do things about it. Some had asked for an FIR, others had asked for the channel itself to apologize. The channel actually did issue a statement distancing itself from the comments made. But all of those would require some kind of a process of engagement. The fact is, the government did not engage. They, in fact, as far as we understand, They only began to engage with the issue when it seemed clear that when Vice President Venkaiah Naidu was embarking on his plane from Senegal to Doha, that it was conveyed to him, or during the flight, it was conveyed to him that the deputy emir of Qatar would not be able to receive him at a banquet. Now, obviously, that's not said as blandly. The excuse given was that there was a medical issue, that there was a suspected exposure to COVID involved. But it seemed like a diplomatic message was being sent, particularly as within hours of the vice president reaching, and Ambassador Kachu was saying this is unprecedented. The Indian ambassador was called in and summoned and given a very stern démarche. I mean, asking for a government to apologize is a fairly strong statement that Qatar decided to make. And the fact is that it was only when that displeasure was made known that the government even decided to engage with the issue. I mean, the diplomatic side of it, obviously, there will be damage control. They will go in and do whatever firefighting is required. I'm not sure that firefighting was actually helpful in some cases, because if our ambassadors ended up saying that national spokespersons of a ruling party are fringe elements, I believe there was a rethink on that. But it wasn't something that was washing any, was making any headway with the interlocutors abroad, because they realized this is not a fringe element that they're talking about. It's a national spokesperson. As we all know, people do not go on television channels representing parties unless the party decides that they should be representing them. So it was very clear that even the damage control was done a little hurriedly. And India will be dealing with the fallout of all that has happened in the next few months. Hopefully, of course, the diplomatic service will step up to the plate.
Yeah. So let me bring in Ambassador Navdeep at this point. I think there are many things, of course, here at stake. There are the billions of dollars at stake in trade, private business, import-export, remittances. But the larger point is that Prime Minister Modi, and you know this because you were serving when some of these things happened. Prime Minister Modi invested a great deal of personal energy and showcased his success at actually turning around relations in the Gulf country, in the West Asian countries. And today, in some ways, it might be his personal brand that is being sullied by all of this that has happened, which is why it further boggles the mind as to why the government and the party would not have stepped in way earlier. Navdeep, can you just unmute yourself, please? Yeah.
Absolutely, Barkha. The Prime Minister invested a lot of energy into the relationship. He, the bilateral relationships with several of these countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, have been transformed in the last few years. The Prime Minister has visited UAE thrice. He's visited Saudi Arabia. He's visited Bahrain. All of these. He's received the highest civilian awards from the governments of UAE and Bahrain. And all of that speaks of the personal relationship that he was able to establish. So it's particularly tragic to see some of that hard work that he and his diplomatic team put in over the last few years to get squandered in this fashion. I think why is it happening? Why the disconnect between the so-called fringe of the party and the diplomatic efforts and the outreach that Prime Minister has made? It seems that the party thought it could conveniently maintain a duality. The government, the diplomats, the Prime Minister could woo the Muslim world, but back home, a politics of polarization could be pursued for electoral gain. And I think that effort to do so disregards the reality that you live in a very interconnected world today. What is said for domestic consumption doesn't stay limited. It travels across seamlessly and instantly. And I think that lack of awareness that you cannot have the dichotomy that you thought you could nurture persist for any length of time is what has precipitated this. But I think in addition, I would say that we saw over the last at least 2 years, if not more, hate speech being normalized on some of the mainstream TV channels and from some of the leading spokespersons of the party. And so, on Suhasini's point, why was nothing done for the first 10 days? Well, because people thought it's par for the course, right? It didn't ring the alarm bells that it should have. And I want to come to the point that you made, that this was not just any tutu mama. This was not just any throwaway comment to score some brownie points in a debate. There are red lines that you should be aware of. Ambassador Katu referred to the lack of understanding of something as basic as that you can say a lot of stuff and get away with it. We've had lynchings in India, and there was no criticism in the Arab world. We've had a revision of Article 370, and UAE actually went along with this, with us, to say it is India's internal matter. The Saudis refused to intervene, even though Pakistanis tried their very best. So there is a fairly high threshold, but there is a red line. You do not attack the Prophet Muhammad and his family. And that line was breached so crassly that the consequences for anyone who understands a little bit of Islam, and anyone who understands what happened in France and Netherlands and so on, would have had that self-awareness that, I can go up to a point and no further.
I think you make it. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you make an excellent perceptive point about the dualism, and in some ways, that separation sought between the politics of the party and the sort of recalibrated foreign policy of the government, that eventually overlapped, and that explains or answers what Suhasini has asked: why was nothing done for 10 days? I think nobody thought that there would be consequences. Now let me take this to Hardik. I've been following some of your tweets. You seem to be among those, please correct me if I'm wrong, who is not pleased with the government response, who is not pleased with the government's disowning of Nupur Sharma. You see is an essential sort of hypocrisy, as it were, in the public conversation right now. Tell us why, because instead of getting agitated, for example, Hardik, over these countries, some of them theocracies, all of them not democracies, lecturing India on how we should conduct ourselves, well, as Suhasini says, all of this could have been avoided had we just handled this internally. We wouldn't have come to this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think on Nupur Sharma's point, I think that I do not agree with the statements that she made, nor do I think that the response was appropriate, the government not taking action for the first few days. And for the simple reason being that she is not just any other internet troll, or she's not just someone heading, a religious organization who shouts on TV. She represents the ruling party. She's a national spokesperson. So her comments were going to be viewed differently as opposed to, someone else. Now, India, as has been mentioned, we have economic interests, we have dependency, we have a very thriving diaspora in the Middle East, and so a strong protest has been registered by those countries, and India has taken the steps it has. But also on the ideological side, I do not think that these countries are also gold standards when it comes to upholding rights of religious minorities. And I think that what we are seeing is them standing up for the state religion, as they have often done, as both Ambassadors Suri and Kabjir mentioned, that there has been a red line that you do not go after the Prophet, and they have demonstrated it on multiple occasions, demonstrated it now with India. And I think that, it was the right choice for the government to have suspended her, but I think it should have happened much earlier.
What I'm hearing you say is it shouldn't have been in response to these countries. You're not convinced of the value of their intervention because, like Ambassador Karju, you think theirs is a theological response, and that who are they to tell us what to do? And I think that's actually a fair set of questions to ask, if only we had done something ourselves. Zafar, I'm going to try talking to you once because you're on a terrible line. If you'd like to just come in and make your comments. Zafar Sareshwala.
See, Barkha, in last few days, I was on two places. In fact, these ambassadors, who I have highest reverence, there was in Russia. Russia had hosted economic summit with OIC countries. It was just on between 20th and 23rd of May, and I was there. Although this Nupur thing had not happened, but you know that the way the narrative is happening in the country, particularly on the television, and even on in the Twitter space, the question which was asked to me, everybody, because I'll go behind this little bit. Mr. Modi has taken India to a level in last 7-8 years, particularly in the Islamic world. He has done, because I have been myself visiting these countries for the past 30 years, and there is a visible change. The way people there look towards India and Indians. So in that context, the only question which I was asked by these people, I met a lot of people. There were heads of state from number of countries, and there was 100% participation in this summit by 58 Islamic countries. It was in the city of Kazan. Everybody was asking me what's happening in India. People were showing me, because since last so many months, what is being said by lot of people used to translate this into Arabic and English with subtitles. And people used to come to me, people from UAE, from Bahrain, from Kuwait, that what's happening in India? Suddenly, what's happening? I had no answer for that. And then I went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I was there just 3-4 days, 5 days back. In fact, when Nupur thing happened, I was there. People, the Hindus, not the Muslims, who are on the top positions in these countries, and our ambassador Puri Saab knows that in those countries, the top guys are non-Muslim Hindus from India. And they were wondering what's happening. They used to come with Twitter, writings, and they said, "Is this the way?" And particularly this Naveen Jindal, he was holding an important position as president, or I don't know what, of BJP in Delhi. His language, people have no problem with fact, stating of the fact, but particularly Nupur Sharma and these people, they were, spewing with venom against the Prophet of Islam, against Quran. If you attack Muslims in India, is not an issue. It's not a big issue. But this red line had been crossed several times. But what Nupur did, she had crossed all the lines. And she was sitting there as representative of BJP. Now,
Yeah.
BJP is world's largest political party, and it is the ruling party of the country. So
Okay, hang
that,
on. Hang on. Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and I want to take this back to our panel, but I want to also play out what Nupur Sharma herself says to her namesake at the BJP supporting platform Op India. Before she is disowned, she actually talks about the kind of support that she's getting from inside government. Now, this could be an empty boast, this could be authentic, we don't know. But it really does undermine the government's claim of her being a fringe element, and it goes to the heart of what Ambassador Navdeep just called the dualism that actually, pulled the government under its own weight. So listen in, and then I'll come back to all of you for comments.
And I can tell you, after Raza Academy, infamous for their Azad Midan riots and for desecrating, destroying the Amar Jawan Jyoti, those rather culprits and doers can go ahead and file an FIR against me. Devendra Fadnavis ji called to say, "Don't worry, beta, we are with you. We are all here with you." So the senior leadership, be it the Prime Minister's office, the Honorable Home Minister's office, be it the party president's office, they're all rallying behind me.
So she's doing nobody any favors there by claiming the Prime Minister's office, the Home Minister's office, everybody is rallying behind me. Before I go back to our diplomat, so Hasni, if you want to come in on the dualism that Navdeep has spoken about, Nupur's own sort of actually moment of, she thinks this is her moment. Till she's actually dumped, I think Nupur Sharma thought that this was her moment of fame.
I think that was probably, she was accurate when she said that. I think the problem was that for once India's domestic politics got in the way of its international relations to a point that the government felt could not be borne with, because in the past we have seen this clash between domestic politics and diplomacy. We've seen it in the last few years. We saw it over Jammu Kashmir. We saw it over the farmers' protests, certainly Citizenship Amendment Act. I remember a time when the Canadian Prime Minister decided to speak about what had happened in the farmers' protests in India, and the Ministry of External Affairs actually cut all India-Canada meetings for the next few months. So all of those came in the realm of what the government could say is internal matters. But when it becomes a question of somebody's comments that have been made about a religion, which is a universal religion, which has followers around the world, it becomes something that even the government, I think, realized was too much. But again, it doesn't explain why the delay. It doesn't explain why it took so long, unless the government has not been told. Because the fact is, the Qatar government spoke after a week of social media coverage of those comments across the Gulf. We saw all kinds of websites talking about it, a lot of abuse for Prime Minister Modi, hashtags in Arabic against him. We also saw, the idea of supermarkets saying we will not run Indian products in our market. So I'm surprised that the government did not get this kind of feedback earlier, and what actually became the breaking point. But I think, Barkha, one has to remember that eventually, and Ambassador Suri put it very well when he talked about a dualism. Eventually, you can't keep walking in two boats at the same time. You cannot have one sort of voice inside your country and assume that in this day and age, that voice will not carry across the world. People are hearing what you say inside India as much as they hear what you say when you go abroad, when you make great speeches about religious tolerance and all the rest. I hold no card, and I agree with Hardik completely. I think Hardik had tweeted even on the day that, or a few days later, that you can't condone the threats of violence against somebody for any kind of speech. But speech has to be responsible. It cannot be seen as as hate speech. And when it takes the level and the international fora that it occupied, now, I think you must realize this is much more serious than people realize. And yes, sure, you can say that none of these countries have the right to talk about India, given their own records. But then when democracies like the European Union, when democracies like the United States issue statements or issue reports about what they see as concerns about religious freedom in India, India's reaction is extremely bristling. We just saw last week, India called America out and said, you're doing vote bank politics when you talk about religious freedom in India. So it's not as if there's, it's essentially, I'm sorry to say it, but essentially where the government feels it is up against a force it cannot deal with, it gives in. And when it feels that it can bully or it can ride roughshod over other people's feelings, and I say that with a lot of responsibility. The idea to me as an Indian citizen, and I cover foreign policy, I've said this to you before, but as an Indian citizen, the idea to me that the government could sit on something for 10 days and not say there's anything wrong with it, and then give in when you get a summons from 15 countries or starting with one country. I mean, that to me is shameful. It's a day of sadness when this is how a government treats an issue that is upsetting its own citizens.
And I actually agree with you, because I actually understand why we bristle when other countries lecture to us. I remember when Barack Obama was the American president and he came here, so I say you'll remember this, and lectured to Indians on Article 25, which is the right to equality of religion, and then took a flight from here to Saudi Arabia. Everybody called out the hypocrisy of that. But then we've got to be able to manage things within our own people much better. Let me take this back to the two ambassadors, and then I'll come back to Hardik and Zafar. Ambassador Navdeep Suri, to you first. You spoke about the dualism. Do you agree with Ambassador Karju that you have to distinguish between the politics and theology, and that the essential response of the Muslim world is theological? Could there have been a different response? Because India's now, there's a little bit of confusion. We're lashing out at the OIC, we're lashing out at Pakistan, we're putting them onto one side, and then we're trying to handle Qatar, UAE, Saudis, Maldives, Indonesia, Iran in a different way? Navdeep.
I wouldn't. OIC and Pakistan are always in a different category. What they say is par for the course, it's predictable, it's expected, and we treat it with the disdain that it deserves. And we continue to do that. I want to make two, 3 points. One is on this theology issue. First, when these comparisons are made, the Gulf countries make no pretense that they're democracies. They make no pretense that they are secular. They are moving from extremely religiously conservative systems to ones which are relatively more open and tolerant towards other faiths. And it is a very initial step that they've taken on that road. So, we're really not, we're comparing apples and oranges there. The second point I want to make, and I feel very strongly about this, that over the last few years, our diplomatic outreach into the Gulf had pretty much marginalized the Pakistanis. They were on the fringe. Today, we give them so much fodder, so much material that they can use against us to amplify every idiotic statement that some spokesperson or the other makes, that we are undercutting the real inroads that we had made over the last few years. So there is enough organic material that we create. There's no shortage of that. But we are giving our adversaries the stick to beat us with and to embarrass us in these countries. The third point I want to make is that actually, regardless of all that has happened in the last 48 hours or thereabouts, I think the story isn't over simply because you just flashed that boycott Qatar hashtag, which is trending at number 2 in India. Well, scroll down the timeline and see the abuse that is being piled on the leadership and people of Qatar, or in other cases that is happening. If by chance there were people who still felt sympathy for us, our trolls will make sure that they present the ugliest face of India to this constituency, and they are left with no doubt that this is a different India from the one that they held with so much affection. When we say with great pride there are 8.7 million Indians in the Gulf, when we say with great pride that we get $50 billion of remittances from the Gulf, over the last decade, Indians had become the preferred expatriates over Pakistanis, over Bangladeshis. The Muslim countries were not as successful in bringing. Indians were seen as the best. Today, please talk to those Indians and do a dipstick about their sentiment on what's happening, regardless of religious persuasion. There is a sense of nervousness amongst them that this was completely unnecessary. And tomorrow, when they meet their Arab boss or colleague or whoever, what face they are taking over there.
I think those are all excellent points, but one thing you didn't mention about something that's not just going on online, but has made its way into mainstream television. I want to take this to Ambassador Karju, is now the conspiracy theory that just like for the farmers' protest, there was a toolkit, there is one for this also. This is the Pakistan-fueled conspiracy. There is some centralized conspiracy. How did all the Muslim nations react together? Why is it copycat? Iske piche kya sajish hai? This is actually being asked. This is not a joke, Ambassador Karju, and it's farcical that we think that some remote control somewhere has the agency to make 15 nations do what whoever this alleged conspiracy drivers are. If you want to come in, and also on all the earlier points that you wanted to respond to, Ambassador Karju.
Yes, I think I will come to this, and permit me a little time. Why do I distinguish between a theological response and a political response? Because the evidence before us of how these nations have conducted themselves towards India points to that. They are aware of their own record of treatment of minorities, they are aware of their own system, and they realize fully that they are in no position to make comments on the situation in India with the social political situation in India. And therefore, I think they refrain from making comments. Yes, there was and is admiration for Indian democracy, but that's in a separate category. So therefore, as Navdeep said, that they never reacted to 370. They did not react to other political issues relating to our own constitutional positions, about which I'm not going into the merits of our domestic policies. Please, I'm analyzing it as a diplomat. They have not done this till now. However, this is a particular point on which the Islamic Ummah has the deepest sensitivity, the Prophet and the Prophet's family. On that, there is no give at all. Now, at the same time, it is also a fact that Navdeep is correctly saying, and that is something I've also served in the Arab world. I served in Abu Dhabi between 1979 and 1982, when conservatism was at its height, and it was palpable that they had no awareness, they had no sensitivity to what is now called Indic religion. None at all. And it was galling. It's a fact. These are facts. So therefore, I feel that there is enormous need for a dialogue on a theological basis between the between the ummah, the broader ummah, and the Indic religions, so that things are clarified, so that prejudices, etc., are removed, so that sensitivities are made aware of. That is the first point I want to make. And I think Zafar Saab's comments substantiate what I'm saying. Now, the second point is that yes, this particular incident may open the doors to a closer examination in these countries of our domestic policies and the agenda which the Sangh Parvar is supposed to be following. It may do that, but till now that has really not happened. If it has happened, it has not come out. And the last point on the economic issues, etc. And I think Navdeep will correct me if I'm wrong. There is by now a mutuality of interest between India and the Gulf. It cannot be said that it's a one-way street. They need us too. It is not 1970. It is not 1980. The
Okay.
India of today is different. And therefore, I think there has to be a need for sensitivity on all sides. What Nupur Sharma said is not acceptable. As someone who grew up uh, with uh, with the feeling that one has to be respectful of the spirituality of everyone and their sentiments, I do believe that what she said was incorrect, was shocking, in fact. However, at the same time, there are people who feel very, very deeply. Let's not be oblivious of this. And Navdeep will again correct me if I'm wrong, who feel very deeply that their religious sentiments are not at all respected when they are in these countries. It is a fact. How many public temples are there in, say, Saudi Arabia? I mean, these are facts. So therefore, there is need for a dialogue, what I'm saying, an acquired dialogue, so that these aspects are addressed too.
Okay, sir, lots of people want to respond to what you've said. I just want to bring in Ambassador Navdeep on the conspiracy theory question I raised that Hardik's been waiting a long time, so him and then Suhasini. Navdeep, go ahead.
Barkha, the idea that Pakistan could have sponsored this whole conspiracy theory business is laughable. Uh, Two examples. I was in Abu Dhabi when the OIC Foreign Ministers Conference was taking place, and Sushma Swaraj ji was invited as the guest of honor. The Emiratis stood by their decision despite all the tantrums thrown by Pakistan. They held their ground. The Pakistanis walked out. Mrs. Swaraj was on the high table. The second was Article 370. Again, I was in Abu Dhabi at that time. And we saw subsequently how the Pakistanis tried to put pressure on the Saudis and others to say, guys, at least come out and say something. They even threw tantrums of trying to create this separate group with Turkey, Malaysia, and Qatar. None of that worked. So to think that when those big issues showed Pakistan's lack of influence, that they could actually do something on this, I think it is laughable.
I I would agree, but this is being mainstream. This is being normalized. Hardik, let's bring you in. I think the point you make about the sort of hypocrisy of the nations in question to talk about pluralism is something we all agree on, and that's why Ambassador Kaju says they never responded when it was about social justice or pluralism. They've responded in the context of theology, but it again doesn't address the complete mishandling, the letting this kind of foster or foment, unless we accept Ambassador Navdeep Suri's point that the government thought that it could reason it through with a kind of dualism between its politics and its diplomacy. Hardik.
Agree. And as was pointed out earlier, when I saw the clip for the first time, it did not ring any alarm bells because every third person on every fifth channel talks like that. So you would not think that this would create an issue. And so I think this also throws up a very interesting point of how domestically we look at it or deal with it, because we have tools on the legal side, one with regards to actions against channels, or the other with regards to actions against individuals for certain kind of speech. Now, when you talk about that, you're again asking for more state intervention, you're asking for more censorship, you're asking for more arbitrariness, you're asking for all sides to be aggrieved that action was taken in this case, it was not taken in the other case. Now, the other side to that is obviously unfettered speech. And when you allow speech to be free, it is inevitable that you are going to have cases like these. So I think it is a very acute and difficult balance that we need to think about very deeply.
I think the point you make about the normalization of the way television debates are conducted is a really excellent point. I don't know if that's how the government also processed it. कि ये तो रोज ही होता है 9 बजे रात को, that this is not really going to have serious consequences. So Hasani, you wanted to come in.
No, I just wanted to make a point because, there is a barrage of whataboutery out there on social media and television channels today. Everyone's asking the same question. Why do we have to respond to countries that have no respect for religions other than their own? Why do we have to respond when there are other people in India who disrespect other religions, disrespect my religion? Why can't I do the same thing? I think, therefore, Barkha, we are getting into a very large debate which is not necessary. The debates that are necessary are the ones on the conduct of the government of India, the people who have been elected and have sworn in to stand by the Constitution of India. Is it as an extension of that? Yes, I would say that the ruling party of India, and in fact the major national parties that have been elected, also carry a certain amount of responsibility. Their spokespersons carry a certain amount of responsibility. So it doesn't matter if 1,000 people are putting hate speech out on television channels or sending hate speech WhatsApp forwards to each other. But what a ruling party says, what the government says, these are all very important messages that India gives to its own people, not just to the rest of the world. My final point there would really be that when we do look at this kind of situation, it is again appalling to me. Today we have heard that the ruling party has decided to put out a list of do's and don'ts for its speakers and how they should address television channels. My question is again and again, and I do hope that every party puts out those kind of statements and those kind of do's and don'ts. My question is really, did we have to wait for somebody to speak, and particularly when a vice president of India was going to visit there and to make that point in that particular context where we were almost forced to say something or to do something? Is this what it has come down to, that we can't see what's wrong right in front of our eyes, what is happening with our own countrymen, and we really need to look to a foreigner to tell us, hey, listen, this is over the line? That's just the point I wanted to make. That what the government and the ruling party does and what national parties do is important. They are responsible. They have been elected. They have taken oaths. So while we do decry what other people say, it certainly is not taken with the same seriousness.
I'll give the closing comments to our two diplomats. Ambassador Kaji, to you first. There have been many mishandlings, including whoever thought of calling a national spokesperson a fringe element, not anticipating this. But of course, when you talk about sort of a philosophical dialogue, wo to baat ki baat hai. Immediately, what needs to happen?
उसके बिना काम नहीं चलेगा. Because what is happening in India today, I agree with Suhas that there has to be a greater standard by which people in public life conduct themselves. They should be more restrained and measured in their speech. Of course, that goes without saying. But I find that there is a lack of sensitivity, indeed a lack of consciousness now about other faiths in India itself. Let me put it like this. It can be said that someone on a television channel is crossing a red line that he does not know he is crossing when he is addressing faith, a representative or a member of one faith. So this person then responds crossing without knowing that he or she is crossing a red line of a member of another faith. Hence, I'm convinced that today, generally in our people, there is a lack of consciousness about this. As Hardik was saying that he didn't realize this. Why didn't he realize this when it is common that everyone, all of us of my generation know that if you say anything about the Prophet and his family, then it is.
I think the point he was making is that this kind of vitriol is spewed every day on television. Not that he didn't know that the Prophet is sacred.
It is much deeper. Socially today, we are not curious about other faiths. We are not therefore aware. In fact, there is a section of our intellectual opinion which feels that talking of faith and understanding faith itself is perhaps retrogressive. Therefore, my plea is that please, there are faiths in India and we must understand what are the sensitivities of all faiths. Unless we do that, this time around, I'm clear in my mind that, and I've mentioned the Minister of External Affairs because I think it is the minister's responsibility and his ministry's responsibility to ensure that the Vice President, the President, and the Prime Minister, when they are abroad, are never put to an embarrassment. That was first lesson that we were taught, and Navdeep will agree with me. And this was because perhaps there was no awareness that what was being said was crossing a red line of another faith. And hence I said it is theological and not political.
Okay, I'm out of time, but with respect, I have to say that what's arranged in television shows is a very deliberate dialectics of confrontation. I don't think anybody's innocent in how these shows are set up. You call the most extreme voices that you can find, and then you, like a gladiator, send the lions into the den. And I think we all know this, those of us who are from the industry. Let me give the last word to Ambassador Navdeep Suri. You said it's not over yet. What do you think is going to happen next, or what might happen next?
So I think we will have to demonstrate by actions more than our words that we are taking corrective measures, and that perhaps might mean taking disciplinary action in a very public way, which the party's rank and file may not like. But if you want to make sure that the next Yati or the next Tejasvi or the next Nupur doesn't come up, then you will need to take demonstrable action. And remember that countries will be watching us very closely for what we do, not so much as what we say. Second is that, a message somehow would have to go to the troopers on social media, for lack of a better word, that these are the lines that you must not cross, because now what you're doing is harming our national interest. You guys claim to be ultra nationalist. Well, you're hurting us. You are giving tools to our enemy to beat us with. Don't do that. I think that education campaign in that party will have to be conducted. And third and final is, our diplomats in the Gulf and in Muslim countries over the next 3 months would have to work really hard to pick up the pieces. Somebody today said, is this a diplomatic failure for India? I said, no, it's a political failure which the diplomats have to fix now.
Yeah, well said. We leave it there. Thank you very much, Ambassadors Suri and Karju, Suhasini and Hardik, and to Zafar Sureshwala, who unfortunately was on a terrible line and was only able to make one comment. As Navdeep said, it isn't over yet. A lot is left to unpack from this, and I hate to be the cynic on the show, but it is my belief that you're not going to see that kind of cleansing of social media, Navdeep, as you're hoping for. In fact, I sense that we're going through a phase where you're going to see the opposite. You're going to see conspiracy theories abound. You're going to see campaigns organized to support Nupur Sharma. And I think we're going to see a lot of aggression online. And it's going to be interesting to see how it's actually handled by, as I said, our poor diplomats who've been sent out to fix what you rightly said is a political failing. Thank you very much to our panel. See you. And thanks for watching to our audience. Goodbye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.